October 14th, 1942. 11:42 a.m., occupied Poland. The air is razor cold, 6 degrees Celsius, and the sky is a hard, cloudless blue that makes everything feel exposed. A German supply train is tearing down the tracks toward the Eastern Front like it owns the world. It is not just cargo, it is war in motion. 3 million Reich marks worth of high-octane aviation fuel sits inside gray tanker cars, guarded by armed soldiers with machine guns, confident behind steel plating and authority. It looks unstoppable, because it has always been unstoppable. 400 meters away, hidden in the tree line, a 12-year-old boy named Yosef lies still. He has no rifle, no explosives, no uniform, no backup. In his hand is a single piece of broken glass. He doesn't look brave, he looks empty. Calm, in a way, children are not supposed to be calm. He adjusts his grip by a hair's width, waits for the train to hit the curve, and tilts the glass toward the sun. 3 seconds later, the impossible happens. The lead tanker doesn't just ignite, it comes apart. A fireball erupts into the autumn sky, vast and violent, swallowing steel and flesh in one breath. The train derails. Metal twists, wheels scream, guards vanish before they can even raise their rifles. Smoke punches upward like a black monument, and in the woods, Yosef disappears as if he never existed. The German High Command will hunt for trained saboteurs, for British commandos, for partisans with explosives. They will torture suspects and comb forests for bomb fragments that aren't there. They will never think to search for a child, and they will never think to suspect the sun. To understand how a boy becomes something like this, you have to understand the world that made him. By late 1942, Poland wasn't a country anymore. It was a cage with paperwork. The occupation ran on routines, patrol routes, quotas, punishments, silence. In the cities, there were screams and sirens. In the countryside, there was a quieter horror. People who learned that speaking could get you killed, that crying could get you noticed, and that being noticed was how you died. Yosef was small for his age, ribs showing, hunger carved into his face. He lived in a crooked wooden cottage at the forest edge with his grandmother, Awa, a woman made of grief and stubbornness. He lived with her because the Germans had taken everyone else. August 1941. An SS truck rolled into the village, not hunting fighters, hunting bodies. They took Yosef's father for labor to a factory in Essen. They took his mother to a camp whose name villagers wouldn't whisper. Yosef watched from hiding, through a crack, as his parents were dragged into sunlight. That was the last time he saw them. In that moment, something in him switched off. He didn't cry. He went numb. It wasn't courage. It was survival. When trauma is too large, the brain sometimes shuts down emotion, so the mind can keep functioning. Yosef became an observer, a collector of patterns, a child who watched like a scientist because feeling was too expensive. He sat on the roof and watched patrols, trucks, and especially trains. The rail line ran through the valley near his home like a vein feeding the Nazi war machine. Every day, trains rolled east. Tanks, shells, winter gear, food. Yosef memorized schedules without meaning to. He noticed the fuel trains, marked by warning symbols, always slowed at a sharp bend, and steep-grade locals called Dead Man's Curve. He wanted to destroy those trains, but he was 12. He had no gun, no bombs, no way in, until the day he broke his grandmother's reading glasses. It was a simple accident. A hot day in July. The frame snapped, and one thick convex lens popped out. Yosef picked it up. Old glass, imperfect, but strong. He sat on the porch, twisting it in his fingers, and lazily aimed it at the sun. A bright dot appeared on dry wood. Smoke rose, then flame. Yosef froze. He did it again, this time on paper. It ignited fast, too fast, and in that instant, something dangerous clicked in his mind. This wasn't a trick. It was physics. On clear days, sunlight pours energy onto the earth. A lens concentrates that energy into a pin-sized point. That point can reach extreme heat quickly, hot enough to ignite wood, and far hotter than gasoline vapor ever needs. Gasoline vapor is already desperate to explode. It only requires ignition. Yosef thought about the fuel trains. He remembered the faint chemical smell as they passed. He remembered that wartime production was rushed, seals cheap, valves imperfect. On warm days, tanker cars could leak invisible vapor around relief valves. He didn't have a weapon, but he was holding a trigger. For weeks, Yosef trained in secret. He practiced angles and timing. The sun moves. You can't just aim, you have to anticipate. He learned distance and focus. Too close and the heat spreads. Too far and the beam weakens. He learned stability because shaking hands ruin everything. He built a crude support from branches. He turned sabotage into routine. He burned holes into bark floating down a creek until he could ignite moving targets without panic. But fear didn't leave him. If he was seen, the Germans would kill him, and they would kill his grandmother and punish the village. Collective responsibility. That policy weighed on him like stone, yet the memory of his parents dragged him forward. October, 1942, a Tuesday. Yosef woke before dawn with hands trembling so badly he could barely tie his boots. He ate stale bread, drank water, stared at his sleeping grandmother, and whispered goodbye like a prayer. Then he slipped out into frost and shadow, using ditches and brush to avoid roads. He reached the ridge above Dead Man's Curve and set up his nest. He cleared leaves so he wouldn't ignite his own hiding place. He set the branch support and unwrapped the lens from a rag. He waited until the valley began to hum. The train arrived like a black beast, slowing at the grade. Yosef counted cars, found the tankers, and placed the lens on his support. A bright dot of light appeared on the side of a tanker, harsh enough to hurt his eyes. He didn't aim at the steel itself. Steel absorbs heat slowly. He aimed at the relief valve where vapor lived. 1 second, 2, 3, nothing. Panic rose. The train was moving away. He thought he had failed. Then he saw a shimmer above the valve. Heat dancing. 4 seconds. 5 seconds. A hollow whomp, like air collapsing. Then a roar. Fire erupted upward. The tanker ruptured. Burning fuel poured across the tracks, and the train screamed metal agony as it derailed into chaos. Yosef dropped back into the ditch the moment the flash hit and crawled through mud, moving low, slow, invisible. Only when he reached the trees did he run. He burst into the cottage shaking, went to the window, and saw black smoke rising like a victory flag. He had done it, and he believed he was anonymous. He wasn't. 3 days later, a black Mercedes rolled into the village and went straight to the wreckage site. A man stepped out who didn't look like a soldier, Obersturmführer Klaus Reinhardt, Gestapo Technical Branch, a specialist in counter-sabotage forensics. He didn't shout. He didn't burn houses. He studied. He searched for chemical residue, wire traces, footprints, bomb signatures. He found nothing. That absence bothered him more than evidence ever could. Partisans, a lieutenant suggested. Reinhardt shook his head. Partisans leave scars. This was too clean. This wasn't an explosion placed on the train, he murmured. This was ignition. He wrote one word in his notebook. Anomaly. Then he doubled patrols and ordered trees cut back from the track. He tightened security not against bombs, but against something he couldn't name. Yosef watched from his roof as the Germans removed his cover. If he returned to the ridge, he would be seen. A normal child would stop, burn the lens, hide it forever. But Yosef wasn't normal anymore. For the first time in years, Germans looked afraid. That feeling was addictive. Winter arrived and clouds smothered the sun, making attacks impossible. But Yosef used the season to evolve. He stole a physics textbook from the ruined school and learned enough from diagrams to improve his method. He carved a groove into a hollow log to mount the lens, reducing tremor until he could hold the beam steady far longer. When spring returned, he chose a new target, a bridge, the Nauru River Bridge. Trains crossed slowly, and security was heavy. Guard towers, machine guns, patrols. But the Germans watched the banks and tracks. They didn't watch the limestone cliffs hundreds of meters away. May 12, 1943. Yosef climbed the cliff for hours, scraped and bleeding, wedged into a crevice where he was invisible. Below him, the bridge looked small. A heavy transport rolled on, flatbeds with tanks and fuel tankers mixed in. Yosef set the lens into the log mount and aimed at a valve. At that range, the beam wasn't a blinding dot. It was a faint, shimmering coin. He held it steady. 10 seconds. 20. 30. The train crawled. Failure pressed in. Then the seal softened. Vapor hissed out into concentrated sunlight. Ignition. The tanker detonated inside the steel truss, and the structure contained and amplified the blast. Metal buckled. Rivets groaned. The center span gave way, and the burning cargo plunged into the river in a storm of steam and smoke. Yosef fled through the forest, expecting triumph. Instead, he returned to terror. The village square was full of soldiers. Reinhardt stood with a list. They couldn't find the saboteur, so they punished the village. 10 men were dragged out: the baker, the teacher, the blacksmith. Reinhardt spoke calmly, as if announcing a law. Sabotage has a price. If the criminal will not step forward, the community will pay. They hanged them in front of everyone. Yosef stood frozen, unable to breathe, staring at bodies swinging. He looked down at his hands, the hands that held the lens. He ran home and vomited, shaking under blankets, seeing faces every time he blinked. He wanted to confess. He wanted to destroy the lens, but confession would doom his grandmother. He was trapped between guilt and fear. Weeks passed. Then Yosef realized something darker. If he stopped, those 10 men died for nothing. If he stopped, the Germans' calculation worked. So Yosef made his own calculation. He would make the cost too high for them to pay. Reinhardt changed tactics too. Random reprisals weren't catching the ghost. He began studying times and sunlight angles. He traced lines across maps and whispered the unthinkable. The saboteur might be using light. Ridiculous. Until it was the only explanation left. June 21st, 1943. The summer solstice. The longest day. Perfect for Yosef. Perfect for a trap. Reinhardt deployed snipers in trees, camouflaged in netting, and ordered them to watch ridgelines for glints. Not the train. The sun. On the opposite ridge, Yosef was already set. He was exhausted, hollow-eyed, driven more by defiance than hope. This was his longest shot yet, and at that range the margin for error was nearly nothing. The convoy arrived. Heavy locomotives, long line of tankers, fuel for battles that would decide everything. Yosef caught the sun and aimed the trembling needle of light at a valve. A flash. A glint. Reinhardt saw it. "Contact!" he roared. Fire! Mueller fired. The bullet struck rock inches from Yosef's face, spraying shards. Yosef flinched and the lens slipped. More shots tore up dirt. He rolled and scrambled down the backside of the ridge, clutching the glass, heart hammering. But the beam had already done its work. For those few seconds, heat had built inside vapor and seal. As Yosef fled, physics finished the job. A tanker vaporized. The blast wave threw men to the ground and derailed the train into a wall of fire that filled the valley. Smoke erupted so thick it became cover, and Yosef ran through it and vanished. Reinhardt staggered up, staring at burning steel, knowing he had failed again. But now he knew the enemy was a boy. He ordered village sweeps, searching for children with burns, for glass, for anything. Then the sky turned gray. 2 days later, clouds rolled in heavy and cold. Snow began to fall. The sun disappeared, and with it, Yosef's weapon. Winter swallowed the valley. Without clear days, there were no more attacks. Reinhardt searched for months, interrogating families, but without new fire to track, the case went cold. In January 1944, Reinhardt was reassigned to the Eastern Front, where the real war was collapsing. Yosef never struck again. The occupation ended as Soviet forces pushed through and Germans retreated. That spring, Yosef's grandmother died in her sleep, never seeing peace but knowing her grandson still lived. Yosef buried her and placed the lens in her hands, wrapped in the same rag. It had been her glasses, her accident, her unwitting gift of a weapon. He was 14 years old, alone, carrying a silence heavy enough to crush a man. He had destroyed trains, killed soldiers, and provoked a monster into fear. And then he walked away into the world and never spoke of it. Detroit, Michigan, 1987, a hospital room. A retired machinist named Yosef lies in bed, older now, surrounded by the harmless details of an ordinary life. Children, grandchildren, baseball. A graduate student sits beside him with a recorder. "Did you fight?" the student asks. Yosef coughs and stares at the ceiling. "I didn't have a gun," he whispers. "I had glass. The sun," he adds quietly. "I used the sun." He tells the story. Trains, the curve, the bridge, the hangings, the investigator who almost caught him. The student records it, then later dismisses it as confusion, as fantasy, as a mind-mixing memory and dreams. The tape is filed away. It gathers dust for decades. In 2018, Dr. Helena Zimmerman, a military historian, finds an old Gestapo case file while digging through German logistical archives. Reinhardt's notes mention attacks only on clear days, no explosive residue, evidence of focused thermal ignition, and a suspect, possibly a child. Zimmerman freezes. She remembers the Detroit tape. She cross-references the dates. The first attack, October 14, 1942, clear skies, Tuesday. The bridge, May 12, 1943, confirmed. The solstice attack, June 21, 1943, confirmed. It matches. It was not fantasy. It was not senility. It was the truth. Zimmerman publishes her work, and the world finally learns what the Nazis couldn't accept. A boy with broken glass had turned sunlight into sabotage. But Yosef is already gone. He died shortly after the interview, buried under a simple stone with no medal, no monument. And if you stand above that old railway line in Poland today, you can still find scorched stones, vitrified by intense heat, silent witnesses that cannot be interrogated into lying. We are taught wars are won by tanks and bombs and loud generals, but history is also full of ghosts, people too small to notice, too desperate to surrender. Yosef proved you don't need an army to wound an empire. Sometimes all you need is patience, silence, and the courage to stand in the dark and catch the light. If you want more hidden war stories like this, stories buried under official timelines, hit like, subscribe, and stay with us. Because there are still blank pages in history, and we're going to fill them together.